United States might be moving closer to direct talks. On Saturday, North Korea again said it's open to dialogue with the U.S., but it rejected Washington's key precondition that it first demonstrate a willingness to denuclearize. According to the regime's central news agency, a foreign ministry spokesperson said Pyongyang has never accepted preconditions for talks with the U.S. and would not beg for a conversation. The spokesperson said the kind of dialogue North Korea wants is one between states on equal footing. It was just before the closing ceremony of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics last month that North Korea expressed its willingness to talk through General Kim Yong-chol, who was visiting South Korea and met with President Moon.
In recent weeks, there have been signs that North Korea and the United States might be moving closer to direct talks. On Saturday, North Korea again said it's open to dialogue with the U.S., but it rejected Washington's key precondition that it first demonstrate a willingness to denuclearize. According to the regime's central news agency, a foreign ministry spokesperson said Pyongyang has never accepted preconditions for talks with the U.S. and would not beg for conversation. The spokesperson said further that the kind of dialogue North Korea wants is one between states on equal footing. It was just before the closing ceremony of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics last month that North Korea expressed its willingness to talk through General Kim Yong-chol, who was visiting South Korea and met with President Moon Jae-in.
So much made, Bruce, of, will Ivanka Trump say hello to a North Korean official? Did Mike Pence look at the sister? Maybe they made eye contact, maybe they didn't. Does it matter?
Well, the White House said that Pence was going to have a meeting with the North Korean delegation, even someone, Kim's sister, who was sanctioned for human rights violations, and then North Korea at the last minute turned it down. So the U.S. once again had tried dialogue with the North, and the North turned it down. So
what do you make of this? North Korea seems to love talking to South Korea. They invited the South Korean president for this big summit in Pyongyang, and at the same time turning their backs on the Americans.
Right. Well, over the years, they've really sort of picked one country at a time, whether it's Japan, the United States, or South Korea, and had tried to have a charm offensive or dialogue with them. And they try to pick the low-hanging fruit of benefits, and then when it doesn't pan out, then they will regroup and then often go for another country.
So they're successful in the short term at playing everybody off each other.
Right, they have been, but then over time, when it comes for them to deliver, whether it's in the six-party talks or the agreed framework or other negotiations, then they're always hesitant to follow through.
Yeah, long on promises, short on deliverables. The president saying yesterday, we imposed today the heaviest sanctions ever imposed on a country before, and then followed it up with this.
We'll have to see. If the sanctions don't work, we'll have to go phase two. And phase two may be a very rough thing. It may be very, very unfortunate for the world.
Are these really, though, the toughest sanctions ever? Is there more wiggle room the White House has?
Right. The list was very extensive. It was the longest list of entities sanctioned at once on North Korea. So it's a welcome step. It's another step in the international pressure on North Korea. Yet the U.S. is still pulling its punches, particularly against Chinese banks and businesses that are aiding the North Korean missile and nuclear programs.
Why do you think they're pulling their punches? We hear from the administration that we're willing to do anything to stop North Korea. We're being so tough, yet sending a different message.
It's puzzling. It's not maximum pressure if you're holding back on the Chinese facilitators, particularly the banks. Congress sent over a list of 12 Chinese banks to the White House saying that they thought there was evidence there to either identify them as a money laundering concern or impose fines, and there was no action yet.
The North Koreans and the Chinese both know about these banks. Conceivably, the Russians know about them as well. What do they make of the United States not applying maximum pressure?
It's a puzzle, really. You should.
It's got to show weakness, though, doesn't it?
Right. It shows that we're not doing maximum pressure. These are entities that are violating U.S. laws, which are designed to protect the U.S. financial system.
Real quickly, we're hearing now about this stop and search operation of North Korean ships on the high seas that are potentially violating sanctions. You start talking about that. If they don't stop to be searched, then either they run the blockade or you've got a war on your hands.
Right. Well, U.S. officials have said that they've had great compliance with other countries who, will accept an inspection, but we don't have authority because China blocks the authority that we would get through a UN resolution. So we don't have authority to do a search and seizure against the will of the ship or the country that owns it. So, that's why we do need some additional responsibilities or authorities of the UN.
Conceivably, the authority could just come from the President of the United States. If he orders the United States Navy to stop a North Korean ship on the high seas, not much else that needs to be said, right?
Right. Well, then you have, is that piracy on the high seas in a legal sense? You've had in the past where you had really a slow boat chase with a U.S. warship following a North Korean freighter for hundreds or thousands of miles until it turned around back to North Korea.
All right. Well, we will wait and watch. If there's another slow boat chase, we'll have you on to talk about it. Thanks, Bruce.
Who, by the way, wants to talk. We want to talk also only under the right conditions. Otherwise, we're not talking. We'll see what happens. That's my attitude. We'll see what happens. But something has to be done.
President Trump giving North Korea an ultimatum of ending its nuclear program before any talks between the U.S. and the rogue nation happen. At the very least, put them on the table. Will North Korea ever comply with those circumstances and conditions? We're asking Hudson Institute senior fellow Rebecca Heinrichs that. Rebecca, what happened, do you think, that had North Korea saying to South Korea, tell the U.S. I'm willing to talk?
Well, it's this pressure campaign. There are 450 sanctions that the United States has levied against North Korea. All of these countries are not cooperating with the United States in this pressure campaign. And so they're feeling the squeeze. And so it's gotten to the point now where the North Korea is saying, all right, fine, let's talk. Of course, North Korea at this point isn't willing to say we're going to talk about our nuclear missile program. But again, that's why it's so important that President Trump made that ultimatum, because there's nothing to talk about if they're not willing to talk about the nuclear missile program.
But you know who's not helping, in my humble opinion? South Korea. They told us through diplomatic channels to lower our standards and conditions before we talk. I'm thinking to myself, do they understand what we're trying to do here?
I think they understand. It's just that they're so desperate. They are so desperate for some sort of diplomatic breakthrough. But they need to really steel their resolve, let the United States lead on this, because South Korea is not going to solve the problem. Nobody's going to solve the problem. It's got to be between the United States and North Korea. And the only thing we care about for our national security is that nuclear missile program. And because the North Koreans have now successfully demonstrated an intercontinental ballistic missile that can carry a nuclear warhead to the United States, that is what the Trump administration is rightly focused on.
Right. And now talk about the next phase, which would be additional sanctions, the tightest ever, but not as tight as they could be, because more Chinese companies could be sanctioned. We're talking about interdiction. We've talked about that before. We've done it a couple of times. Do you think we're willing to do it on major powers, let's say like Russia, if they're delivering maybe illicitly delivering some type of energy or packages?
I think if we're going to avoid war, we have to be willing to do everything short of that, and it absolutely includes interdiction. I think it does include sanctioning, secondary sanctions, going after Chinese banks, the big bad actors that are continuing to enable North Korea. A lot of that is stopped, but some of it is still going on, and so we do need China's cooperation. China doesn't want war in the North Korean, in North Korea, and we also, I do think, have to be willing to implement a naval blockade before we actually go to, the worst option, but might be the last option, and that is war.
You know what scares South Korea, I believe, and people in the region, is our bloody nose option. But the fact is there is a plan on the table to do just that. How valuable is that in getting these talks to be productive, if indeed they happen?
Well, I don't think that North Korea would be willing to talk at all if it wasn't feeling the squeeze and if it didn't believe that the United States had a credible military option in its back pocket. So I think it's crucial. President Obama made these veiled threats towards North Korea, but nobody remembers that. Nobody even knew he was doing that because nobody believed him. So I think the fact that President Trump, given his personality, I think that really does, it's really having the effect of convincing North Korea that talks might be its best option, and it's going to have to put its nuclear weapons on the table.
I keep going back to the conversation President Obama, President-elect Trump had when he said, "Oh, your number one priority is going to be North Korea." And I'm thinking to myself, we haven't talked about North Korea for 7 3/4 years, but he basically handed the president a grenade and pulled the pin and said, "You deal with it." Rebecca, we're dealing with it, and so maybe North Korea showing signs they want to come to the table shows we're making progress. Thanks so much for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you.
We've said from the diplomatic side, we're ready to talk anytime North Korea would like to talk. and we're ready to have the first meeting without precondition. So we need the DPRK to come to the table for talks. We're ready to talk anytime they'd like to talk. But they have to come to the table, and they have to come to the table with a view that they do want to make a different choice.
Tillerson said he hoped Pyongyang would make the right choice and sit down to talk about it. But he warned North Korea if it keeps pushing the boundaries, it may end up exhausting its diplomatic options. His comments come as North Korea hinted at the possibility of engaging in dialogue with the United States. A key North Korean official at the UN, Cha Sung-nam, told reporters in Beijing on Tuesday that talks are possible if the right conditions are met. Pressed on what those conditions might be, Cha said the conditions North Korea requires. With both the United States and North Korea pushing for dialogue, watchers say the two sides might finally have an opportunity to quell tensions through diplomatic channels. Park So-yeon, Arirang News.